Hey guys, it's Gary. Coming back here doing a video that I'm not really ready to do. But right now I have off work today, and it looks like after today I'm going to be working 6 or 7 days a week. So that's the way it is. So I thought I would do something before I had a real long break when I can't do anything. It's been a rough couple days at work, outside in like 12-degree temperatures, and sure enough I started developing a cough again, so this job may kill me, and I don't have any health insurance still, and I had my walking pneumonia bout just a few weeks ago, so and tomorrow I'm back outside again. So it's potentially, keep your fingers crossed. Yesterday, I didn't work a full day yesterday. When I got home, I decided to reload an Edgar Froese solo album that I have into my PC. It was already in there, but I decided to reload it again for various reasons, for sound quality reasons. And I have a desktop computer, and the drive in the computer, the disk drive in the computer, stopped working like a year after I got the computer. The internal drive wouldn't read anything. So at that point, you're stuck. So I bought an external drive, which was really good because it had the laser light technology on it. It allows you to create labels right on the discs themselves, not paper labels. I don't know if you guys know what laser light recordable CDs and DVDs are, but there's a layer on there, not the layer that you burn the data into, but the opposite side actually enables you to burn images and things like that. Makes things look nice. So when I bought the external drive, because my internal one stopped working, I bought one with laser light technology, and that is the only drive that I've been able to use. What I use to copy my CDs into my computer with, what I use to burn CDs that I play in my car, and MP3 discs and all that kind of stuff. So there's this Edgar Froese compilation that cost me probably about $40 at the time that I picked it up, because it was only available through his record label in Germany called Orange Light Years. And it's basically a compilation. Most of the material, it's a 2-disc compilation. Most of the material on it was already on the other compilations that he came out with. He had a 2-disc compilation called Beyond the Storm, which I think came out in '95. And then he had Ambient Highway, which was 4 or 5 discs. I can't remember now. I've got them all. Most of the material was from those discs, but I got suckered into buying this because it had like 5 tracks, I think 5 tracks that were new, that weren't on any of his other albums, which is how I got suckered into it. Now, I bought this naturally when I had a job and I was working. I wouldn't pay $40-something for a disc now. So I go to load the music in my computer into my external drive that I bought, and the disc gets stuck in the drive, and the door of the drive won't open. It gets to the point when it's obvious that I have to break the drive in order either break the drive or risk losing the CD. There was no screws or anything in the drive that enabled you to work on it in any way, shape, or form. So it's basically you crack the thing open and it's broken and destroyed. Just to get the disc out. So I had to opt to break it, and so now I don't have a drive. Even though I really don't have an income at this point yet, I had to order another one because I can't be without a drive for my computer. So I had to break the drive, which is now trash. I had to throw it out, which prevents me from even being able to, when I'm recording my own music, I do test runs on CDRs of and usually played out in various stereo systems. I have another stereo system in my condo here, and I play it in the car, and that basically tells me how to EQ the thing, put too much bass, not enough bass, that kind of thing. I can't do that now with my music, so I'm waiting for the new one to arrive, but the new drive to arrive. But I got out the disc and thought I was okay, only to see, I don't know if you can see that, the disc is now also destroyed. That is a big chunk out of it. I can't imagine how the disc got even like this. No idea. I was pissed. I still am over this. You can see the chunk out of it there. This most certainly isn't going to play anymore. And of course it's one of the CDs that I laid out the most money for. I guess the only good thing is that the album's since been re-released, and it is easier to get a hold of. And it won't cost you $40 odd for a copy, but it's just such a waste. And that's how my last couple of weeks has been. That's how my whole year has been going, actually. And with musicians dying off, and Paul Bley and David Bowie and everybody else, wow, not a great start to the year. So, I got a cup of tea here because when I go to work tomorrow, I'm going to be outside all day, and I got to hope I don't get my walking pneumonia back. So today, I'm resting and taking it easy. And, well, it's January. We got a little bit of snow today, not a lot. It's been cold as hell, around 12 degrees. I was outside yesterday doing some work for a few hours, and the cold was bad enough, but the winds were killer. It's the winds that really get you. And it's January, and I've been having an email conversation with my buddy Carm, and I'm not even sure quite how we get it. We talk a lot about the Tangerine Dream band anyway, and its musicians. And feel free to tune out if you don't want to hear stories about my personal life, because there's going to be a lot of it mixed in here. And this time of year, January, especially since I've been outside and I'm very aware of the weather, strictly by coincidence, I was having this back and forth conversation with Carm about Chris Franke. I think Chris Franke was in Tangerine Dream from 1970 to 1988. So technically, I would say, besides Edgar Frost, the founder, who passed away last January, I would say Christopher Franke was probably the longest-serving musician in Tangerine Dream. Certainly as an equal, because he was an equal member. I know Linda Spa, the saxophone player, played a lot with Edgar off and on over the years, but there were years when she was out and then in, and didn't play on the albums at all, but did some touring with them. Was never really an equal contributor-composer with the group. So she's been in and out for a lot of years. But Chris Franke was really at least one-third of the band for pretty much all the years he was there. Certainly seen as their classic period. Came on, when was it? I think second or third album he was on. I think he joined them for the second album. And so recorded really the bulk of their material. A lot of albums in the 70s and the 80s before he left in 88. And his reason for leaving, apparently, was similar to a couple other musicians. Paul Hasslinger, one of them, who came along at the end of Chris Franke's tenure with the band, and ended up leaving a bit after Chris as well. And that is Tangerine Dream, always very big on doing soundtracks. I think Chris Franke had a desire, he's a Berlin musician, happily based there for a lot of years, and Tangerine Dream was doing a lot of soundtrack, and specifically, oddly enough, soundtracks for American movies. I'm not aware of them doing as many oddly enough, for Germany-based musicians, not doing as many soundtracks for German or even European TV and movies as much as American, oddly enough. And Chris Franke, I believe, probably his main reason for wanting to go. Part of it might have been a musical change of direction that Edgar Froese wanted to take. But it seemed like Franke was interested in moving to America and picking up on soundtrack work as a solo artist. Excuse me while I continue to sip my tea here. And I attempted to put music on in the background, but it's mostly orchestral music. It's a Chris Franke album of orchestral music, but the volume goes up and down, and you probably can't hear anything now, and it was blasting at the just a minute before I started the video. So Chris Franke left the group. Apparently Edgar Froese was none too happy with that, and has been living in Hollywood. I always thought that must be a strange transition to somebody coming from any country like that. Where you've got buildings hundreds and hundreds of years old that people live in and all that, and coming to Hollywood or LA or anywhere in that area. But according to he's got a website that he doesn't seem to update very much. But it lists a few high points biographically. Christopher Franke, born 1953. Studied music at the Berlin Conservatory, joined Tangerine Dream about 1970 and recorded a lot of albums. This says 37 albums and feature film soundtracks, so I guess the feature film soundtracks aren't counted. I'm not even sure they're counted in that. Wouldn't be 37 out now, so a lot of albums. And a lot of things that some companies released soundtracks for that were not approved by the band. I can remember a TV movie I have called Deadly Something or Other, and the band did not approve of its release, and it was Christopher Franke and Edgar Froese, just the two of them, soundtrack, which they did not approve, but I guess they waived the rights to when they basically were working for hire. And I didn't pull out any Tangerine Dream albums. I mean, at some point, I'm going to do a Tangerine Dream thing. I kind of wish Carm would do it instead of me, to be honest with you. Only because it's going to have to be done in sections. And because there's just so much. And not that I have every album or anything, but there's so many different phases and stages. Certainly couldn't do Tangerine Dream as a group and the members' solo things as well in one video, unless you wanted to go 5 or 6 hours. So Christopher Franke, I don't know if when he left Tangerine Dream in '88, he moved to America right away. That's not real clear. He probably did. Or at least was the process of making that move, and I guess trying to establish... he has his own studio apparently in Hollywood, which would have taken some time to set up. So he had a few transition years there after leaving Tangerine Dream in 1988. And by the way, Christopher Franke started as a drummer in the band, but very quickly kind of dropped the drums and became one of the keyboard players, along with Peter Baumann when they were all keyboard players. In the group when they had the trio of Edgar Froese, Peter Baumann, and Chris Franke. But Chris Franke did on occasion play drums for the first few years and then dropped them in favor of keyboards mainly. And now in 1991 he came out with his first solo album, and it really seems to be his only real, how do I put it, solo album that he sat down and really composed and released as a complete album. And it's also one of the best things I think he's ever done. It came out on take my glasses off because I can't read and turn up the lights. I've also got my computer set up at an odd angle, not my usual angle, because I have to get to the back of it to hook up the new drive when it arrives. Sonic Images, which is his label, but Private Music, which isn't really around anymore, which had a lot of new agey albums at the time, pretty much released it. It's also got the Sonic Images imprint, which is Chris Franke's own label. Nice. This is a nice album. It's too bad that it's out of print now. There are plenty of copies around. All short tracks. All shorter tracks. 12 tracks on here. Most of them under 5 minutes. Some very, very pretty themes. All keyboard oriented. I'm pretty sure that Chris Franke is the only musician on here. It's a picture of him. If you can see his studio in the background. And I believe that's the studio that he built in Hollywood. That's probably what he still uses today. This is a really good album. I remember when this came out. I didn't buy it as soon as it came out, but I bought it. The date says 91. I think I always thought it came out early in 92. And I probably picked it up in 1993. The only other solo album that came out in 92 that really seemed like it was an album meant for release. And what do I mean by that? It seems like Christopher Franke spent very little time creating solo albums and was more busy establishing his building his studio, creating his studio space, and out there looking for soundtrack work. He's only done one live performance as a solo artist, which was in London in October of 91. And in 1992, he released it as the London concert. It's less than 45 minutes long, the actual concert. So I'm guessing there was other artists that played that night. I'm not sure. This is a good album as well. It came, pretty much right on the heels of the release of Pacific Coast Highway. So there's 2 or 3 tracks that are live versions of Pacific Coast Highway. A couple more tracks that are things that Chris Franke recorded with Tangerine Dream, live versions of that. A couple new tracks. And 2 shorter tracks, 3.5 minutes, 4.5 minutes, that were studio tracks which weren't performed live, that he kind of added onto the disc, because it was, like I said, the performance itself was about 45 minutes. So he added these 2 studio tracks, which brings the running time up to about 51 minutes. There's a track on here, one of the studio tracks, called Private Diaries, which is 3.5 minutes long, which I always thought, it's a very up-tempo track, very catchy, great theme to it. I always thought that would make a great single. Now, we know instrumental music don't really have big successes as singles, but if anything was going to be a hit, it's that tune, which is up-tempo. I had a discussion with Carm about this song. This is where I get into my personal stuff. I bought both of these albums pretty much at the same time. I knew who Tangerine Dream was. I knew Tangerine Dream at that point already had 1 million albums out. But I did want to sample at least some of the solo works. And Chris Franke had been with the band for a long time and hadn't put out any solo albums during his time with the band. So I thought, well, I might as well pick up these 2. And I bought them late in 93, I believe it was. And had just purchased them, and I just started listening to them when my best friend in the world for years decided to move out of the area, out of New Jersey, and move to Florida. And I took some time off work, And what his plan was to rent a moving truck, load up the moving truck with his belongings, all his furniture and everything, and drive himself to his place that he was moving to in Florida. He also was towing his car behind him, but one of those trailers that you drive your car up on. I took time off work and I told him I'd help him move. I thought it'd be an interesting little road trip adventure. Oddly enough, just before the move, I had already started to take off work. I got a really, really bad cold. Sick like I hadn't been for years. Fever and all that. And he had already rented the truck, so I took a couple days just to get bed rest and recuperate. And it was January. And I just emailed him because I had to guess the year. He told me it would have been 1994, and I was close. I was guessing 90, maybe 95 or so. Amongst being sick, there was a snowstorm that happened just a few days also before he moved. The first couple days I took bed rest. But knowing that I had to get back at a certain time, I think I'd booked a flight back from Florida and had somebody coming to pick me up at the airport. So we only had a certain amount of days to get out there. Now, technically, you could drive to Florida from here, I guess, in a little bit 24, 30 hours, something like that. But not with this big moving truck and towing his car behind him, plus his cat with us to boot. As a result, we had to drive a lot slower. It took several days to get there. So we were under the gun a little bit. And, because I had missed the first few days of packing and we were going to move because of being sick. So when I was still sick when I got to his house the day that basically started loading the truck up. Couldn't do really most of the stuff by himself. There's a lot of heavy furniture to move. And so when I got there, nothing had been loaded up into the car yet, into the truck. And spent we didn't even know what day we were going to leave. I thought I'd get it all loaded up in one day and at least get a few hours out on the road. But it got so late and it took so long that the first night we weren't able to leave because we weren't finished packing. So I went back home, got another night's sleep. The next day finished the packing, which was quite another, probably 6 hours of packing or something. And I remember leaving at night, and it was a big deal because he was leaving. He was leaving, and it was his mother's house, so he was leaving her, and she'd be living alone at that point. And so off he went to Florida, and I went with him for the move. And shortly before the move, I had bought these two Christopher Franke albums. And because I never, ever, ever go on any trip without bringing very carefully selected music with me, I put both of those albums on a cassette tape. And because the rental truck didn't have a cassette player in it, only a radio, bought a whole bunch of batteries and a boombox with me. I thought it would be loud enough to hear the music. But the truck was so noisy, they could barely hear the music over the truck, but I tried anyway. The roar of the engine and the shaking of it was horrible. And very cold. We left and I think it might have still even been snowing when we left. And driving, most of the trip, oddly enough, was still in very cold weather. Very absolute frigid January river weather in 1994. And here I am with these two albums. I had listened to them a little bit before, so I'm trying to play them on cassette. And there's one of the studio tracks, Private Diaries, on here, which I talked about as being very up-tempo, little 3.5-minute track that would make a great single, I thought. It was a particular favorite of mine. And this is, the whole story is to basically tell you the power of music. That was 1994. And even though Private Diaries, the song on here, I think is heard probably, if you heard it, you would just say it's a happy, up-tempo piece. There's something sad in it. To me, I've always thought, since I played then, about the theme. But then again, and I actually get sad every time I listen to it. I don't know if it's anything to do with the music at all. I think, I strongly suspect, both of these albums, that the reason that I find so much of the music sad when I listen to it now, and on this one there's certainly down-tempo, pretty things that you can hear as being sad. But I think that when I hear even these up-tempo pieces, that I just kind of feel sorrow when I listen to them, is because of this move, because of the conditions surrounding my listening to the album. I had gotten the album, I wasn't really... I may have given it a couple spins before I ended up making cassette copies to take on the trip with me. And I played them a bunch of times. And even during this Florida trip, not knowing that over 20 years later now, 22 years later to be exact, since it's January, I can't play either one of these albums without thinking of that trip and making me kind of sad. That's the power of music, guys. Sometimes you have to be careful what you do with this music. And I think especially instrumental music, because with instrumental music you don't have lyrics telling you or describing something to you. You can read whatever into it you want to, or what you think the music is. Like I said, to me that up-tempo piece, Private Diaries, sounds incredibly sad, but I don't know, when I asked Carm about it, and I don't think he really hears it, and that's understandable, because I don't know if it's there or not, to be honest with you. But every time I hear, and it's any of the tracks off of either one of these albums, but that song Private Diaries in particular, wow, I can think of a particular piece of the road here in New Jersey that I always think of whenever I play that track. And I have to guess that I must have played it even in my car before we took this trip. I'd driven past this particular area, which is not far from where I was living at the time. Still something about a dozen miles or so away from where I live now. And oddly enough, even when I drive on that particular road, I always think of Private Diaries, the song, whether it's playing or not. I think that's the power of music. Sometimes it's not a good thing, because it can recall unpleasant memories. And it's hard. I can't really listen to either one of these albums when I'm like down, you know. I have to be pretty up to play them. And if I'm feeling so-so, and I did put them on because they're in my computer, which is where I listen to all my music from. And I put them on for a little while today, and I definitely felt the funk, you know. I definitely felt like I was getting into that mood, which is fairly easy because, you know, it's been an odd year so far anyway. For me, in a lot of ways, because I have a new job which is very difficult and demanding, and just because of the general vibe, you know, all these musicians and everything dying, and the big TV thing that you always see at the end of January, where they go over all the celebrities or, you know, well-known people, mostly actors, but musicians too, who died in the prior year. Wow, you know, and it's always people that, you know, when I was young, I didn't know who some of those people were, because their careers had pretty much been over, you know, before I really was old enough to know who they were. Nowadays, forget it. Nowadays, they're close in age to me. So that's my story about the power of music. And I can't listen to those two Chris Franke albums. And those are, I think, his best albums, really, in a lot of ways. But to continue on with Chris Franke, and I'm thinking that a lot of people get what I'm talking about. And I have that with a lot of albums. There's a lot of albums that I put on that I recall back in the day, especially the vinyl days. In a lot of years, I only had cassette players in my car. I would always make a cassette copy of a new album to drive around with. Nameless people, but Eberhard Weber, a lot of times I was getting his albums, especially 1970s era albums. Immediately would make a cassette copy and just listen to it driving back and forth to work or shopping or whatever. And oddly enough, when I put those albums on now, I remember something as mundane and normal as driving to the supermarket to go buy food. And I'll put on Little Movements by Eberhard Weber, and I'll remember driving around my town just listening to it, going to the supermarket or going to pick up a pizza or something. And I can't not think of that when I listen to that music. So it's almost like I'm very wary now. Sometimes, and there's something about driving in the car that helps trigger it too. I can listen to albums at home and sometimes recall when I first heard them or maybe when I first got them. But there's something about driving in a car and bringing that music with you, for me anyway, that for some reason makes me recall that particular album so much more, and I don't know why that is. So if I bought an album and something's going on at that period in my life, and I only listen to it at home, I might remember the time period that I bought it, and none of the real details about my life at the time. If I brought that album with me and played it around in my car for some reason, oddly enough, I would probably recall not only the period I bought the album in, but the crap that was going on in my life, good or bad or otherwise, that was going on in my life at the time that I bought the album, just from bringing it in the car and driving around with me. It's a weird thing. It's like, I don't know, it's like studying for a test or something. I don't know why that driving around in a car, even if it's the same places I've been to a million times before, would, for whatever reason, help me recall what was going on in my life in that specific time that I bought the album. I don't know why that is with the whole car thing. So if I just buy an album and listen to it primarily at home, chances are I might remember the time period I bought it, and that's it. It's weird. Weird thing. There's just something about driving around without even intending it to do it that fuses memories in my mind of not just listening to a particular album, but all the stuff that was surrounding it that was going on in my life at the time. I don't know why that does that, why that works so much. So I was following Chris Franke's career after buying his first two albums. In '93, he released something. This is signed by him too, which doesn't at all look like his name. It looks like Gale, Gayle to me, but whatever. Now, at first, in '93, when I bought this was not in stores. Clean Mania. This is almost more of a techno album. 2 long tracks, about 20 minutes each, and one short, like 3 or 4 minute track. A lot more techno, a lot different than the first 2 albums. It's definitely electronic. No kind of sad, depressing stuff. No real pretty stuff. It's an electronic album, and occasionally gets into some pretty beat heavy stuff. Originally, this was only available through his website, which I believe had just started up at the time. And this one only has the Sonic Images imprint on it, not private music, like the other 2 had. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure. Was London on private music as well? Rerecord. So it wasn't on private music. Only the first one was. Rerecord released a few of his albums too. But this one is only Sonic Images. So this is pretty much, I guess, in a way, his third solo album. I get the feeling that when he recorded this, he was already very deep into composing a lot of soundtrack music. Like I said, a couple 20-minute tracks and a 4-minute track. Again, all solo Christopher Franke. A lot more techno involved. And he was already at this time doing soundtracks. So I think I think Clean Mania was basically almost like a weekend project album that he did when he had time to. I think it was recorded fairly quickly. And at the time, looking inside the booklet that comes with it, he mentions his previous solo albums, Pacific Coast Highway, the London concert, and Universal Soldier soundtrack, which, like an action movie. Actually, he's done, most of the movies he's done, and even the TV shows he's done are kind of very commercial Hollywood movies, almost none of which I've seen. But he also had an album called New Music for Films, Volume 1, on Varice Sarabande, which was an interesting album, which I will get to next. New Music for Films, which is a really good album, but there's almost no Christopher Franke playing on it. It's orchestral music. It's all stuff that Chris wrote himself. Crank up the light a little bit more. Varice Sarabande released this, and released a lot of his soundtrack albums. Even though it still also has the Sonic Images imprint on it, which again is Chris's label. I think he's using the same picture in just about all his albums. And there's a few... this reminds me of a bit like Mark Isham's film music album, which years before this was Mark Isham's second release on Windham Hill, which compiled 3 soundtracks that Mark Isham wrote. They're really good. It's really good music. In that case, though, Mark Isham played a lot on the soundtrack as well as other musicians. In this case, this is almost pure orchestral music, and so you don't really hear any of, anyway, from what I remember, you don't really hear any synthesizer on it at all. And if it's there, it may be here or there for a second or two, but I don't recall hearing any at all. So it's all orchestral music, all composed and orchestrated by Christopher Franke. Listed as being performed by the Berlin Symphony Film Orchestra. It also says additional performance by Christopher Franke, but like I said, I really don't hear it, and I don't know what he was playing. Maybe piano, which would be weird, because I haven't heard anything besides Chris Franke playing drums and synthesizers. But I really don't recall hearing any synthesizer on this at all. Amongst the other music in here, it's a good album to listen to just for musically. Forgetting its soundtrack stuff, it works pretty well. There's a few movies that are listed here as, I guess, the music is from these movies. Something called She Woke Up, which is a movie I've never heard of, actually. Was an American movie. Another movie called McBain. Christopher Walken was in it. And Eye of the Storm, which I have heard of. Dennis Hopper movie. And those are the movies that lists here, so I'm guessing it's just essentially the soundtrack. Orchestral soundtrack for those 3 movies. Good stuff. Not really so much for fans of maybe Tangerine Dream or the electronic synthesizer thing, because I don't hear any electronic keyboards on there at all. But it goes to show you, with Universal Soldier and those 3 soundtracks listed in there, that Chris Franke was already heavily involved in what he came to America for, and that is the soundtrack thing. Which is why pretty much you don't have solo releases by him after this point very much. He's released a bunch of other albums in his name, but well, we'll get to that. One of the things that he did from a purely musical point of view that wasn't really a soundtrack to a movie was the Celestine Prophecy, which was a big hit book and movie. And this isn't, oddly enough, a soundtrack to a movie, which is kind of what it looks like it may be when you first take a look at it, but rather it's supposedly just an instrumental, something to accompany the concept or reading of the book. So in some ways, at least it's not a movie soundtrack, so it's not tied to any kind of images or any kind of time frame where, oh, we need a minute and 10 seconds of music for this scene. It's none of that. Supposedly, he was approached and asked to do a kind of musical accompaniment to the book, to the story of the book. I don't think there's nobody reading passages off of the book that I'm aware of at all. Now, I supposedly read somewhere that this was, oddly enough, his best-selling album, and I guess it's possible because the book was such a big hit. There's the author of the book. I could try to focus this, but I don't know if it's going to work. James Redfield, I guess, was the writer of the... Again, I haven't read the book. But it's strictly kind of a musical... a thematic music thing. I guess Christopher read the book and based on his impressions of the book wrote this kind of soundtrack to it. But obviously you don't have to, and I haven't read the book or even seen the movie to get it. This is from '96. Musical Voyage by Christopher Franke. Pretty good. Lot of pretty stuff in there. I forgot to even look to see how this is performed. I haven't played this one in quite a while. Once again, the Berlin Symphonic Film Orchestra, composed by Alan Wagner, and there's a chorus on here as well. So, a lot of I guess this one was also a lot of orchestral stuff. I remember it being very pretty. Additional performances by Paul Horn on American Indian flutes, Chinese flutes. A whole bunch of other musicians are playing in here. A lot of flute players, shakuhachi players, pan flutes, harmonium, voices, Celtic voices, African voices, Tibetan voices, even some Chinese violin, the air who was on here. So a little bit of world music in there. Not a synthesizer album, certainly. More of almost, like a soundtrack album, but without being limited to that visual image and having to write short little pieces of music to accompany a scene. And supposedly, this was his best-selling solo album. And I came across it. I remember coming across this in the store, when there were still physical stores around to buy this stuff in. So pretty much there's not a whole lot of, after this point, a whole lot of real albums that Christopher Franke just went into the studio and recorded on his own as solo albums. It seems like pretty much film and soundtrack, TV soundtrack work pretty much took up most of his time after this point. And if he did something else, it was almost like a weekend project or something done on the side. And he's come out with more than I have here, actually. I have two best of albums, oddly enough. First one that came out, which really didn't give a whole lot of information about what its contents were, is something called Enchanting Nature. And supposedly this is music inspired by scenes of nature. I'm trying to dig things out of the box, not being too successful at it. These three things that open up. There's a booklet in there. So I thought of it when I picked it up as being new music. There's just some nature scenes in here. But what it really is, oddly enough, even though the titles do not give it away on the back, is it's kind of a best of album. And he's done this at least 2 times that I know of. So look at the titles. Most of the titles I don't recognize. When I put the CD on, though, I realized just about all these tunes are songs taken from pretty much his first 2 albums, the London concert, specifically the couple studio tracks that were tacked on, and a lot of music from Pacific Coast Highway, and maybe a couple new things. The thing that doesn't give it away is, oddly enough, most of the tracks are retitled. Most of them, not all of them. So you're hearing these tracks, and you're grabbing your old CD to look at it, and you're like, I know that song, and the titles don't match up. You're looking for that title to match up what was on the other albums. So he's changed the titles of most of them. And also, it's not just a compilation, though. These are like alternate versions of the tracks. So if you're a fan like I am, you would want to hear them anyway, but it's quite odd. I don't really think they're complete re-recordings. If you know how MIDI works, when you can record a bunch of notes into your computer or onto tape or whatever, and you save that file. And if you've got a part that's a piano part, you save that technical performance of you playing that piano part. But you may want to re-record it, and instead of using those same notes that you played on piano and that same performance on piano, you may decide that you want to play it through an organ sound or a keyboard sound or a saxophone sound or something else. And you could do that with MIDI in the way that recording goes at that time and since then. So you could basically re-record without having to play anything again. You can re-record these songs because you've got the performances saved in the computer and alter the sounds, which is kind of what it sounds like he did on a lot of the tracks here. It's pretty much the same performance because the tempos are the same, the note selection appears to be all the same, but a lot of the sounds are different or slightly different, and also the mix is different. I hear drums taken out of the mix in a lot of cases. I guess this was, intended to be a quieter album. So that song "Private Diaries" pops up on here without the drums, which is odd because it's a very up-tempo song, and the drum part, which was electronic drums, nonetheless, are not there. So it's still kind of an up-tempo track, but you have to follow the bass line. So it's odd. So it's kind of like alternate versions of tracks. I don't really think any of them are necessarily better than the originals. Very interesting to hear and quite odd. And the fact that the titles were changed as well. And I'm trying to recall here which one. Private Diaries. Ooh, I can't recall. I don't know. Stream Garden, was it? There's a couple tracks that have real standout themes. Private Diaries from the London concert is one of them, and from Pacific Coast Highway is Black Garden View, a track which was recorded live on the London album and also on the Pacific Coast Highway album. And it was retitled something different here, but also appears on the Enchanting Nature album. So it's quite strange. Nowhere does it tell you. It's essentially a compilation of alternate versions and remixes of tracks previously released. And I forget when that came out. No date on it, but I want to say it was like 96 or something like that. In 99, on Earth Tone Records, I don't know if at that point Sonic Images existed just as a website and not so much a record label anymore. But Earth Tone Records released an album called Epic by Christopher Franke, which again at first seems like, oh, finally a new non-soundtrack album. But when you read the back of it, it says it's the first best of collection from Christopher Franke, which is not necessarily true. Enchanting Nature kind of is, I don't know. And again, they did the same thing. Looking at the tracks, instead of it's a mishmash. A lot of the tracks on here are actually from the Enchanting Nature album. This one, which was the kind of like the alternate versions, and so they're using again the titles from the Enchanting Nature album, and I guess the versions from the Enchanting Nature album. I think there's a couple new tracks on here possibly, but it basically says that this is his first best of album, which it kind of really isn't. Selected compositions from Pacific Coast Highway, which it really isn't in a way, and it is because it seems like the versions of the stuff from Pacific Coast Highway are actually from the Enchanting Nature album, and it says also included tracks from Enchanting Nature, and the Celestine Prophecy, and other releases. So this is a kind of confusing album. I think probably there's a sampling of stuff from Celestine Prophecy, but most of this is from, I think, the Enchanting Nature, alternate versions album. Kind of confusing, and not really the way that I would have gone back and selected from his first two solo albums, those versions. But Celestine Prophecy, one track from the Clean Mania album, 2 tracks from Raven, which was a movie soundtrack, supposedly 2 tracks from Pacific Coast Highway, but I don't think those were the versions from Pacific Coast Highway that it's telling me it is. Yeah, I don't think so. I think they're a track from Night of the Running Man, which must have been a movie. Some of these I've never heard of. A track from Transformations of Mind. I don't have any idea what that is. Enchanting Nature. 2 previously unreleased tracks. And a few from New Music for Films. I don't know. I don't know how, I'm absolutely sure this is out of print now. Is it a good place to start with this music? I don't know. I'd say if you get Pacific Coast Highway, buy that, and the London concert, and then maybe this. It's hard to say. Then another orchestral album came out. This is 2000, even though the music I think is a bit older than that. Again on Sonic Images, so I guess the label was still around in 2000. Was this Maurice Sarabande as well? Nope. This one just says Sonic Images on it, oddly enough. Another rare example of Sonic Images, I guess, doing the actual release and distribution. New Music for Films Volume 2, which is actually what I had playing until a couple minutes ago in the background. And that, again, is a soundtrack from movies. Interesting, because this one actually has a showing of the albums that Chris Franke played with Tangerine Dream on. So it's not just kind of acknowledging his solo career, but rather all those albums starting in the top corner there, which would have been their second album, so I guess he was on board since the second album. And going on to Zeit, which is my favorite, probably my favorite one. Alpha Centauri, Green Desert, Phaedra, Rubicon, Ricochet, all those albums, Encore, Cyclone, all those albums that he played a part on, as well as some of the soundtracks, not all of them. I thought that was kind of interesting that he showed those that far into his own solo career. Again, New Music for Films is essentially orchestral music, but again, quite good. I don't know to what extent you were able to hear it in the background for the first 40 minutes of my yak fest here. But some music was from a movie called The Inheritance, Pacific Blue, Terror in the Mall, something I'd never heard of, a movie called Solo, which I've never heard of, but starred Mario Van Peebles, and Tarzan and the Lost City. So it's music from those various films. Inside this booklet, though, it does list a lot of TV shows and things that may have not been released actually on disc that he did the soundtrack to. The Tommyknockers, which was a Stephen King movie. He did some music for Tales from the Crypt. Got a lot of stuff. The Surgeon, Mantis, which I believe was the TV series. Night of the Running Man in '95. Walker, Texas Ranger in '95. Babylon 5, which is I'll get to that. Did a movie called Kidnapped, Pacific Blue, Wolverine 1996. Tell Me No Secrets, 96. A lot of these in the late 90s. The Inheritance, Tarzan and the Lost City, Lost in the Bermuda Triangle. Wow. I think this came out 2000, so it only goes up to 1999. Interestingly, well, for me anyway, one of the things one of the reasons I guess we don't see a whole lot of solo albums by him, because he's so busy with movie soundtracks. He did this documentary, which I recall hearing about at the time, but I don't remember what it's about. A documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? I seem to remember that. He also did soundtrack for the movie Hooligans. Something that I always forget to listen to his music for, oddly enough, because here's an actual network TV show that I do watch, The Amazing Race, which is a competition thing that's on, is it twice a year? Runs for about 3 months, and it's on twice a year. It's not on in the summertime. Competition show, where teams get eliminated, and the last team to finish is the winner. They start with about 13 teams, and they usually eliminate one team a week. And maybe it's a dozen episodes, and then it's on twice a year. It's 2 winners per year. It's not currently on. I like the fact that it's kept to a minimum. It goes many months where it's not on. For instance, it's not on in the summer at all. And apparently, Chris Franke has done, and it's weird because I keep reading this and I keep forgetting it. Chris Franke has done the music as of 2015, which I guess would include the, I don't know if that includes the last season, which ended just weeks ago. But Chris Franke has done the music for, at that time, 260 episodes of The Amazing Race, which probably all, I'm guessing, he's probably been on board since the show started, because it's been on for 10 or 12 years. And I always forget to listen. I always pay attention to the music, and yet I always forget that it's him doing it. So that alone would keep him busy, and I guess explains why we don't get any, real solo albums by him. So I got a sampling of 1993. Here's a movie called Raven that they did. He did the soundtrack for. For some reason, I don't think this is I don't think that's an orchestral one, though. I think there might be a little bit more of his playing on here. Let's see. Composed by, there's some lyrics here. Performed by Christopher Franke and the Berlin Symphonic Film Orchestra, which is the orchestra that he works with in all these albums. But I think there's a bit more of his playing actually on the soundtrack here for the Raven album. And a lot of his soundtracks will have an occasional vocal song on them as well. I don't even know. For some reason, I think this was a TV movie, but I could be wrong. None of the movies I've seen, I would get. I got to the point where I was, again, on his label, on Sonic Images. I would pick things up when I could get them very inexpensively. Here's another one that was 2002. I believe this is an animated movie. Something else I haven't seen of Tenchi, the movie, which is an animated movie from Japan, I'm pretty sure. I don't know who this would have been marketed to. More like teenagers or whatever. This I remember playing. This is much more electronic. There's a couple vocal tracks on here. And it's more electronic oriented than the orchestral stuff that he'd been doing. I like most of it, though. Oddly enough, there is a vocal song that is like the main theme for the movie. One time sung largely by a woman, I think, and another time by a man. And the guy's voice is awful, and he's out of pitch and everything. So I'm a little surprised that they even bothered to put that second version of the vocal song on there, because the guy really can't sing very well. And again, this is a movie that I don't even know if it played in America. I guess I'm hardly its target audience. But it's from 2002. I must have got that soundtrack pretty cheap. And then something that was a real regular job for Chris, just like the Amazing Race TV thing, was the TV series Babylon 5. Which Christopher Franke, I don't know if he did. I want to say he did the soundtrack for all of the episodes. Once he signed on, he did do the soundtrack for all the episodes. I just don't know if he started with the very first season of this new version of Babylon 5. This was this album came out 2001, but obviously the series is from before that. He did a best of album. What he was doing for a long time, and he was releasing on his own, I guess he had it written into his contract that he could do this, is he started releasing the music. He was creating the soundtrack for every single episode of Babylon 5 for years. Like I said, if not for the entire run of the series, for most of it. And for a while, strictly initially through his only through his website, and then I remember copies going on Amazon and other places. He started releasing the soundtracks, music to each individual episode. If you can imagine, there were tons and tons and tons of CDs like this. This one doesn't even have a cover. This is just a clear cover, and you see the CD through there. It's an episode of Babylon 5, again, which is something I never watched, called Into the Fire. And it's all of the music. I'll take the CD out so you can see it's deceptive because it's a clear CD. It's a clear CD, so it's meant to look like a tire. But this is only the music that he wrote for this episode of Babylon 5 Into the Fire. And at one point he was releasing every single episode that he scored music for, if you can imagine. So there would be potentially like a couple hundred, maybe. I don't know if he did release the music for all of the episodes he scored, but at one point he was putting them out. And for some reason, once they started becoming available on other sites besides his website, sometimes people were charging ridiculous prices for these. Obviously, they're going to be limited edition, but I saw $20 or $30 going for these. It's just an individual episode. And I have two of them. Each one is about 35 minutes, so that's more music than I kind of would expect for an hour-long TV show with commercials. But there was, like I did show the best of. I only picked up two of these. This one actually has a cover. Reach for the Stars, I guess, was the name of this episode. And this is just like a card, not even full size, that's placed in the CD box. And again, another CD. This one is at least meant to look round. But again, this is just the episode of just the music from a specific episode, and 36 minutes. So I must have picked up these two because I don't know the episodes. This came out in '97. I guess I would pick up individual episodes, when I could get it at reasonable prices. But because I think they were fairly short runs of all of these, people started charging ridiculous prices for them. It's only 35 minutes worth of music. And as you can imagine with soundtrack, short pieces of music, because it's really there to accompany an image. But interesting guy. I didn't mean to go on this long, but I kind of knew I would. Interesting career. Still doing The Amazing Race. I know The Amazing Race is going to be on again, so I'm going to try to remember to look for his name. He's still in Hollywood, so I'm sure he's still producing a lot of stuff. He's not that old. He was born in '53, so he's probably got a lot of years left to record music. But I just, I kind of am hoping that he would get back to recording solo albums like Pacific Coast Highway and the London concert. I know he hasn't done any live performances apart from that one London concert in '91. And that's probably live performances are less important, but it would be nice to have some new original material that's not, just soundtrack material. But I guess he's fairly successful at what he's doing there, and I'm sure it doesn't seem to leave him a lot of time to do anything else. But still, here's to hoping that Chris Franke has many years left to creating, and let's hope, guys, that he gets back to doing some solo albums as well. And sorry for going this long once again. Don't know, I'm going to come back when I can and maybe do short videos. Work is I don't have a schedule, and that's part of the problem. Is if I knew what days I was going to be off, when I was going to be off, I could plan my life better, and videos and things like that. But when I left work yesterday, I didn't even know I was going to be off today. They were like, call us in the morning. So it's like, well, does that mean am I going to have the day off, or am I going to have to go in midday? So that's kind of the way I'm hanging right now. Anybody in northern New Jersey has a decent job for me, let me know. Preferably another office job. Okay, guys, so Chris Franke and my personal life, all in one. This will maybe get the ball rolling a little bit for doing some Tangerine Dream related things. The band itself is such a huge undertaking. I thought I probably would do an Edgar Fresa solo thing, but which is a little hard to do because his music is so tied in with the Tangerine Dream band. But I got Chris Franke off, and Chris Franke has obviously been on his own now since 1988, so that's quite a while. Okay, guys, sorry for going so long. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope the new year picks up and gets better for everyone, myself included. Certainly is a lot of room for improvement, no doubt about that. Okay, guys, hope everyone's doing well, and peace, love, and send me some good vibes, okay? Take care.